joining us. If you could take a minute, we're going to talk about how we're using ChatGPT here at Erick Lab today. If you've ever come to one of our talks, you know we always start with a Mentimeter. So if you could go to menti.com, menti.com, and then use this 8-digit code 9176-9902. If you're not into that and you want to use the QR code like Tyler's doing, you can try that as well.
My natural reasons.
Oh, dude. We'll leave this up for a minute and then we'll look at the results in a couple of minutes too. So can the people online hear me?
Yeah.
They can? Oh, cool. Can they still hear me if I'm like standing over here too? All right, cool, right on. I move around a lot. Yeah, so my name is Nate Quarderer. I'm the education director here at Erick Lab and at EASL. I've got my colleagues Erick Verleye, Jim Sanovia, and Elsa Culler here today as well, who are going to talk a little bit about how their experience with ChatGPT has gone. So I want to thank them as well. Like I said, we'll look at the results of this in just a couple of minutes. If you want to look at the slides that I'm using today, there's another QR code here. There'll be 3 or 4 other QR codes. I don't know if you can bring them all up at once or how that all works, but and again, I want to thank everybody for joining us today. I'm not going to talk about how ChatGPT works. I'll give you some resources if you're interested in that to check that out in just a second, but we're going to talk about what it is really briefly and then how we're using it. ChatGPT is a language model developed by OpenAI for understanding and generating human-like text. It can engage in natural language conversations, answer questions, provide explanations, generate text, perform various text-related tasks. ChatGPT's responses are based on patterns in the data it was trained on and may not always be accurate or reliable. So users should be advised to exercise caution and critical thinking when using ChatGPT, especially for important tasks and seeking information. And then finally, this text was generated using ChatGPT to highlight some of its capabilities. And so with that, I want to, like I said, we're not going to talk about how ChatGPT works in this session. If you want to learn more about how it works and kind of some history behind ChatGPT, I would invite you to go watch our very own friendly neighborhood data scientist Ty Tuff's talk from last February, where he talks a little bit about how chat works and kind of some of the history. I want to just
Ty Tuff. I'm the data scientist for EASL and Earth Lab. I usually introduce our speakers, but since I'm stepping in and speaking this week, I'm introducing myself. Happy to have you guys here. My goal today is to sort of get everybody up to speed with GPT and what's going on. And my hope is that you guys are just using this like all the time for everything every day after this. Okay, so let's dive into it. First thing I want you to do is try it.
Yeah, I would invite you to check out Ty's talk from last year. It's on YouTube. I've got a link to my slides. The gist of what Ty was trying to say there was that he was hopeful that, you know, chat was just coming out when he started when he gave this talk back in February, and he was hopeful that folks would start using it regularly for things like getting help with code and summarizing text and things. And so that part didn't work, but I would encourage you to go back and check out Ty's talk. My next slide was to actually look at the Mentimeter results and see like how folks are using ChatGPT. And so we can see that we got about 40% of the folks are using it several times. A couple of us have never used it, which is great. Got about 30% of the users are using it all the time. A few of us have used it once or twice. I think if you go to the next slide or to the next question in, oh good, some of you have already gotten to the next question. So the next question was just like, how are some of you using ChatGPT? So optimizing and fixing code issues, coding help, coding, mostly when I hit a technical wall. Looks like lots of people are using it for coding. Provide plain language translation of scientific writing. Summarize questionnaires. Entertain my elderly parents with the wonders of the 21st century. I love it. And so people are using it in lots of different ways. I'm going to spend just a couple of minutes talking about ways that I'm using ChatGPT, some of which I think are more helpful than others. And then we're going to get a chance to hear from Elsa, Jan, and Eric. My piece will come in 4 acts. And so the first act will be, I'll give you some insight into the first prompt that I asked ChatGPT to answer for me. And then we'll talk a little bit about how I'm using it to plot temperature versus time, how we use ChatGPT to respond to reviewer number 2, to a manuscript that we're working on. And then finally, how we're using Python, or how we're using Chat as a Python helper in the final act. And so this is really kind of, I guess, inspired by a book that Elsa let me borrow a couple of months ago. It's by Janelle Shane. It's called You Look Like a Thing and I Love You: How Artificial Intelligence Works and Why It's Making the World a Weirder Place. And so this title was the output of a neural network that the author was trying to write that would produce pickup lines. And so this is an example of an AI-generated pickup line. It's great, try it out. The other thing that I thought this book did a really funny job of, I guess, was in addition to giving you some insights about how AI works, she had some really funny examples of like recipes that she tried to get the AI to write for her. And so you can see that like the AI is picking up the patterns, right? Like it kind of looks like a recipe, maybe. But if you start to dig in and look at some of the details there, you might wonder, like, I don't know, is this something that I want to take into the kitchen with me as like a teaching aid? But I love like the little random punctuation that it throws in there. This is from the author's blog from 2017. Her blog is titled AI Weirdness. We have a copy of this book in the office. If you ask Elsa nicely, she might let you borrow it. But I would say that like the reason that I chose to do this topic today was because read this, gave me some ideas about how AI is working, and I kind of started to wonder, like, how are folks in the office using tools like ChatGPT to make their life simpler? And so I'll talk about 4 ways that I'm doing it. So if we rewind back to the talk that Ty gave us in February of 2023, I apologize. I had never used ChatGPT prior to Ty's talk. And so he gave us some opportunity during his talk to say, try it out, give it a shot, see how it goes. And so I finally have a chance to ask the magic robot a question. And this is the first thing that I ask it is, what is the best spaghetti recipe? So I don't know if that reveals a lot about like where my thinking is at. But and so if you look at it, it kind of looks like a spaghetti recipe, right? Maybe does anything jump out at you? Is it like missing anything? Or are there things in the ingredients that you wouldn't put in there?
There's no tomato. Oh, no, there is.
There's tomatoes. Is there any like other tomatoey stuff that you might put in a spaghetti recipe? I don't know. Sauce. Sauce, maybe some tomato sauce, tomato paste. Like, I don't know. It doesn't sound like it would be very flavorful. Anyway, the point that I'm trying to make here is that tools like ChatGPT are good for creating things like recipes, but go back to that first slide about using caution, using critical thought. If you were to take this recipe into the kitchen and start cooking with it, like, would you want to potentially amend things like that? And so this is kind of a funny example. This was like my hello world, if you will, to ChatGPT, the first question that I got a chance to ask it. The second question that I asked, this is again during Ty's presentation back in February, I said, create a plot of temperature versus time for Atlanta, Georgia for the last 100 years. I'm not exactly sure like what I expected it to do. Right, this is a language model, and so it's not going to like draw me a picture of temperature versus time in Atlanta for 100 years. So it kind of politely says, well, you know, that's not really what I was built to do, but I can give you some ideas about how you might think about creating this figure. And so I didn't ask it anything about coding or R or Python, but it says, hey, what you might think about doing is going out into the internet, finding some data, and then trying to create a plot like you're asking to create using Python or R. Which I thought was kind of wild. Like, I didn't ask it anything about code. I didn't say, give me this plot using Python or R. So I thought that was kind of wild. And then it also says, go look for data in a place like the National Center for Environmental Information, which is a NOAA group, and one that we use in our teaching when you come take our classes for our Earth Data Analytics certificate and the internships that we teach. We often tell folks, to achieve something like this, to make a plot of temperature versus time, to go and look for data in places like NCDI or NOAA. And so I was kind of blown away. I didn't ask it for any code. But it gave me some code. It said, you could try this out, here's some code that you might use in Python to create this graph. It gives me some instructions about, you want to make sure that the temperature data that you read in is in CSV format, that the date is in this particular format. It should have 2 columns for date and temperature, and that you can set the date as the index column, resample, etc. And so to me, like if you've ever looked at our Earth Data Science textbook, like those instructions are almost verbatim out of the lessons that we teach related to working with tabular data and working with time series data. We encourage folks to go look for data at the NCEI website. We generate plots like this. And so I was pretty blown away that I asked it to do something like create a plot of temperature versus time. It didn't create the plot, but it gave me the steps that I could begin to follow to do it. And so I said, okay, I'll copy and paste that code into my notebook and see if it works. I even changed my prompt so that I said, here's a link to a CSV that we could put into that code, see if that works. So I read that back in, and it came back, it gave me an error. It said, no, there's nothing in your date. There's nothing in your data that looks like date. And so I'm not able to plot date versus time here. So I had to rely on my previous experience. And I guess using a little bit of critical thought to say, okay, I've done something like this before. Like we literally have a lesson in our textbook that teaches folks how to do this. And so I opened up the data in pandas, noticed that you have to kind of clean up the first 3 rows of this NCEI data to actually get at what you're trying to find. So you want to get rid of this metadata at the top. And so I changed my prompt again for a 3rd time. I said, okay, could you include in the pandas read CSV statement, could you include skip these first 3 rows and how to treat missing values? So you said, okay, I'll do that. And so it repeated, gives me back this code down here. I copy that code into a code editor and I get a plot that looks like temperature versus time. I guess I changed it from Atlanta in my original prompt to Colorado Springs, but you can see this is like something that you can start to work with. You want to clean up that horizontal time axis, but here we've gone from taking a prompt saying, give me a graph or a plot of temperature versus time, and then using, for your prior experience, some critical thought, I was able to take the code that it gave me and produce a plot that I was looking for. So this is another example of how I'm using ChatGPT, kind of like by accident. Like I don't think, in hindsight, that's not the kind of prompt that you would necessarily want to ask a language model, but I'm still learning. I've got 2 more examples here. The 3rd example I'm going to go through really briefly. So we recently submitted a manuscript. We got some reviews back that asked us to report our findings in a different unit. And I was not familiar with how to convert from the unit that we had reported our findings in into this other unit. I'd never seen it done that way in the literature, never done it that way myself. And so I said, is there a way to convert from one unit to another? And it said, yeah, you could try this logistic equation. And so I did that, did some converting. So this is great. Are there any examples in the literature of people doing this kind of thing? I said, yeah, there are. There's some papers, check these out. So we checked those out. I said, how would I interpret the findings now that these are reported in this new unit? It's like, oh, you could think about it this way. And so we haven't submitted our revisions to the manuscript yet, but the plan is to take the feedback that we got from chat and put it into the revisions and see what the authors and the reviewers think. And so using chat as a way of addressing reviewers' responses to a manuscript. And then this is the 3rd, and this is the 4th act that I'll rush through real quick. And so I came into this with the hope of creating a plot of, what I wanted to make was a stacked bar chart. And I wanted to have a line plot laid on top of that. And I wanted to have primary and secondary axis labels. And I wanted to be able to put annotated text in here. And so I knew in my mind that this is what I wanted to do. But I wasn't exactly sure how to do that kind of thing with Python. And so I just started out with a simple request of how do I take data in Python in 2 columns and start to make a graph? And then I said, okay, how would I add a second variable to that? Actually, the first request I gave, I said, here, you could do this and you could do it using NumPy. and I'm not a NumPy user. And so I said, well, that's good, but could you tell me how to do it using pandas? And it said, yeah. And so it gave me the response in pandas. And then from there, I was able to go from a simple line graph of one variable in time to, okay, now how could I make that a bar plot instead? And so it gave me some feedback. If you know me, I like my bar plots stacked up. And so I said, okay, how would I take this bar plot and turn it into a stacked bar plot? And so it gave me some ideas about that. And then finally, I said, okay, I want to add a line plot to that. And I want to add a secondary axis, and I want to adjust my axis, and I want to customize the tick marks, and I want to add labels, and I want to add a box around the label, and I want to add an edge color around that box. And I want to do all these different things. And so I started from like a simple idea and climbed my way through this like cascading series of questions. And it gave me some code after several iterations, most of which I understood. There were a few like loops in here, which made me a little uncomfortable. And so I was glad that Chat wrote that for me and that I didn't have to do that from scratch. I appreciate that. And I was able to come up with the plot that I was looking for ultimately. Talk about like, whether or not it's, graphically, grammatically okay, but I got what I was looking for. And the point here is not like the final product of this graph, but the point is that I was able to go from a simple idea, like a sketch on my whiteboard, to a final product in Python over the course of an hour. And I didn't have to have like this back and forth with Google or this back and forth with Stack Exchange or Stack Overflow. And it felt like I had like Elsa or Nathan or some of my expert coding friends like in the room with me, holding my hand as we're doing this. And so it was a really helpful tool. And so those are 4 ways that I'm using ChatGPT to try to make my life a little bit more easy. I appreciate you listening to me this morning. I'm going to pass it over to Elsa. And then in the next 30 minutes or so, between Elsa, Jim, and Eric, you're going to hear about how 3 of our other colleagues are using chat. So thank you for your time. Elsa, I'm going to turn it over to you. If you want to share from this machine, you can. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Nate. Well, I think that Nate may have just given the absolute best demonstration of my point here with just, watching Nate be able to do this stuff with ChatGPT is really cool. And we're finding similar things with students as well. So I just wanted to go through an example here of the kind of question that students might have for us. And, we can tell them the answer, but usually that's not what they want to know. They want to know how they can find the answer themselves. So my example here is that I have a student who wants to plot a shapefile on an interactive folium map. We teach them how to use folium maps. We teach them how to use shapefiles. And so it's pretty natural for people to want to put those together. But the folium documentation here isn't much help. They only have information for how you can manually enter all of the points in your polygon and then put that on your folium map. At least that is easily findable in the index. So next step, the way it used to work is we would send them to Stack Overflow or other sites like this on the internet. So this is actually like probably an even better example than I was looking for of how Stack Overflow can totally fail to give useful information here. So this is the entire response. Nobody made an actual response on this post of this person who wanted to do exactly what my hypothetical student wants to do. And instead we have, they had to reiterate their question. And then, we have the suggestion of using the toJSON method. Did you try using that? But no working code. And then they ask for an example, they don't get an example. And then he says, there are plenty of examples at the GeoPandas website. All right, really helpful, thanks. Are there indeed many examples on the GeoPandas website? I was unable to find any examples on the GeoPandas website. I didn't look for a terribly long time, but if I'm not able to find it quickly, then probably the student isn't going to be able to find it at all. So compare and contrast asking this question to ChatGPT It gives us an answer that works, it's clear. It highlights some steps that students may forget, like replacing the path to the shapefile with the actual path to their shapefile. And it is respectful at all times. It doesn't make you feel like an idiot for asking the question, which is a problem sometimes with people on the internet. So in summary, ChatGPT lets us give students more interesting problems to solve from day one, because I don't have to worry that if I forget a step in my instructions or something changed and our textbook code no longer works, that the students will just be totally stuck and have to come through me through the answer. They can go through ChatGPT. So it's easier to find answer on ChatGPT than searching the web or even searching the textbook in most cases. Students also get immediate feedback on how to ask questions that will get them answers. And so we do like students to learn how to do that, but when they do that on the discussion board, they have to wait for a person to respond. And with ChatGPT, like Nate was saying, they can iterate very quickly and figure out what information they need to contain in that question. And they also don't seem to expect ChatGPT to read their minds quite as much as they expect us to be able to read about like what they wanted to do, for example. Although we did have a student the other day send a message that was like, can you look at my code? I tried ChatGPT and it didn't work. Which we're still working on. So. But the cons are, and this is from talking to students and also from us observing them, it is easy to just copy and paste the answer and not understand how it works. And I'm not sure that this is more of a disadvantage with ChatGPT than with any other approach. But students have a lot of anxiety about this, that when they're using ChatGPT a lot, they're not really learning how to do it. And sometimes ChatGPT doesn't know about bugs or the most up-to-date libraries. So for example, we're having students use a library called HoloViews for plotting this year, which is new. So a lot of so where ChatGPT might be very good using an older library like Matplotlib or the libraries that are based off of Matplotlib, it doesn't always know what's up with those newer libraries, and so that can be a little harder. We have noticed that students are asking fewer questions to each other, which is, I think, a real con. And it's hard to be sure that that's because of using ChatGPT, but it's something we want to keep an eye on. And then lastly, some students are not allowed to use ChatGPT on their work computers. And so they're kind of, if we're making it kind of a requirement that they be able to use ChatGPT, then that's a little bit tough. Yeah. Any questions about that? Before I hand it over to Jim, or is it going back to you, Nate?
I think Jim is next.
Jim is next.
Awesome. Thank you, Elsa.
Jim Imachia, Sichangu, Lakota, Atehan, Weyalo. Hello, my name is Jim. I am the tribal resilience data scientist here at ESL. And 2 a.m. So this past year, since I've been here, I've been working with trying to get TCUs and tribes aware of Earth data science, and had many meetings in different formats and webinars and just getting everyone caught up with Earth data science. What is it? What is big data? And so I got overwhelmed after a while, and I thought, oh my goodness, I have hundreds of pages of notes. How do I know what they really want or looking for? And it was just me and this other her name was Anissa McKeenan from AHEC, where it was just so much data for us to look through. And so I think I have it in here. Ty's talk on ChatGPT. I have a little bit of his quote from that first 30 seconds.
Thank you, Jim.
Yes.
Hope we are using it all the time, every day. So, all right, well, okay, here we go. So he introduced me to ChatGPT and helped me learn how to talk to it, because I wasn't having good success talking to it at first. And so learning how to communicate it and learning how to do it in chunks separately from one another, and then going back so anyway, so I needed to stay organized. I tried everything: Google Docs, Sheets, Jamboard, slides, you know. My boss at AHEC, John, was saying, I don't know how you do it. I saw your Google folder and I'm never going back there again. Documents and documents. I somehow made sense of it, but I thought, all right, how do we pull this out? Yeah. What do I really want? What were the real needs and wants of the faculty? And keeping in mind, this is all new to them and me still. I guess I have a few year head start, but it's total. I remember I was blank the first 2 years going, I don't know why I'm doing this, but I know I need it. And so what I thought they needed, because when you're new like that, I don't know if it's just with TCU, probably not, probably a lot of people, but the faculty, they kept showing up, but they never said anything. All right, I gotta speak up for them and just charge forward with some initiatives for them. And so how do I do that? And so, but nowadays they're starting to slowly show up. And this, I highlighted this one in blue: showcase technology with more technology. It's important to notice my circle. Can you guys see it? Dad jokes was part of my list. I thought, so started compiling it, and after I started to get better at communicating with it about Earth data science topics, climate, geospatial, other things too. So I needed categories. So went through a lot of work to get categories out of a lot of notes, and then use those categories to start helping me mine all this data. And I really could use the non-free version of it to go faster. And then create summaries out of those. And then I thought, well, why not graph it? I learned a little Python, and I want to share a little bit of Python I learned with the faculty, because they don't know it yet, but it's headed their way. And it finally hit them last late spring, early summer. Brought Nate in to give him some little Python, little intro to the EDS world, CI world and all that. And so anyway, so I started making that part of my model, thinking, all right, this is how I even showed him, this is how I came up with the agenda of the notes today. I showed him ChatGPT, and then I show him a little Python, how I asked it to give me the code to graph this, and it gave it to me, threw it in Colab, and then made a nice little slide, the last forward to the chair for the next meeting, with the 5 categories that popped out that they wanted to work on the most. Another cool thing was I used to teach GIS for 12 years. And one thing I taught was lat longs, just manipulating and dealing with them. And because they never come in the format you want them. And so, man, this would be like a 2-3 class period with them, because they're not used to manipulating and working with data, and this is all remote and it's new. So it's hard and slow. And so anyway, I did this in like 5 minutes in ChatGPT though. And I thought, oh man, if I was still teaching, I'd be doing this. And so it's just, I had a list of locations and addresses that I did by hand a long time ago of all the TCUs. So I threw that in there. I go, can you give me the lat longs to these? And then eventually converted them to locations on a map. And then now it's kind of working towards tribal data. I'm not sure we know what that means yet. I think there's people out there marching forward and making statements, which is great. It gives the rest of us something to work off of. But when I work with tribal office government people and tribal college university faculty, and they're two separate entities, I think they would be one. You know, they're still figuring out data sovereignty. I try to show them what's been published, what's been put out there, and they don't, you know, it's not they don't like it, they're just still learning, I think. So they're just saying no for now, gently, saying, well, you know, we'll figure it out together. And so I think these ventures are going to help us. It's going to help me help them, guide them to get something written down, because it's hard. No one wants to commit to the word data sovereignty. There's plenty of faculty out, university faculty, that are willing to write everything about data sovereignty, ethics, and governments and publish. But I have yet to see a tribal government employee or a tribal college faculty willing to do that, which makes me think about it for a while. And I'm still thinking about it. And I'm having chat help me think about it, thinking, all right, why? There's something missing in between here. So, and I think it's just taking it slow and working with them. And really, I think it's they need to see the data in action. They need a pilot project to say, oh, that's where our data is going. That's what it looks like. You know, so Savali and Ty taught me to make my own data cube. And I can't really Python, but here we go. Thanks.
All right, thank you, Jim. And then last but not least, we are going to hear from our good friend Erick Verleye talking about using ChatGPT for unit testing. Erick, take it away.
Yeah, so I use GPT-4 actually, which is the paid version of ChatGPT. I would recommend that if you're going to be using chat for a lot of work. It's $20 a month, but just saw someone ask a question in the chat about that, and yeah, I would recommend GPT-4. So what are unit tests? So unit tests are functions that execute a small piece of code or an atomized piece of code, and you control the inputs to this function, and then you check to see that the expected results are produced from your code. A single unit test should test a single use case. So again, keeping the atomic structure of the code. A collection of unit tests is called a test suite. Let me just back up for a second, and I'm going to try to do this quickly, but a lot of people write code in like kind of a stream of consciousness. They have one super long script, or they have one function that does a bunch of different things. You really should be structuring your code using separation of concerns, where each function has just a single thing that it's concerned with doing, right? That way, when you go to write unit tests, you can focus on all of the cases and the edge cases of a single function and just as concerned. So when you create a test suite, you are writing a collection of unit tests, and that test suite aims for 100% code coverage. That means that every single line of code is executed in the set of code that you're testing, and every single logical branch, so all your if, else, all those branches are covered. Unit testing really should be considered a requirement for most of your projects. It's something that like most people skip, but if you're seriously writing code, it's not like a recommendation. It's not like something that you should do if you have extra time. It's something that it's absolutely necessary. Especially if you're iterating on code, because if you have a suite of tests that all pass, there's 100% coverage. Every time you make a change to your code or you try to increase its efficiency or something like that, then you have your test suite to run to make sure that the changes you made are still valid, right? Because your test suite shouldn't change. Those tests should still be the same. All right, so how to write unit tests with ChatGPT. I like to start by giving ChatGPT a little bit of context on the overall project. And then I'll tell it specifically what this function is doing. So going back to the separation of concerns for the code, so this function here just verifies an HDF file. That's its only job, right? So this could be something that maybe you have again in some long notebook of code, but should be its own function. So I'll just say I'm working on a project that reads in a bunch of HDF files and turns them into a single net CDF file. This function in particular just verifies each individual HDF file. Can you write some unit tests for it? It'll say sure, it'll try to cover all the cases. There's not too many cases here, and it's a pretty short function, but oops. And then it will spit out. So when you're testing a function, you create a single class for all the tests for that single function. So it creates a class, it creates the first unit test for it. It uses mocking a lot, which is a whole nother it's kind of like advanced unit testing, but it's very useful. And then yeah, you can just copy and paste those into a test suite, run the test, make sure your code works. But before you do that, you should always verify that the tests are actually, first of all, testing something, and that you actually know what unit tests are and like what their objective is. Because if you just copy and paste a bunch of tests and you run them and they all pass, and you're like, oh, I have tested code, this is great, like my code definitely works and there's no bugs, then it's just not, it's going to be even worse than if you didn't write a test in the first place. So that's it. Yeah, so just a plug for unit tests for sure. I would definitely start to learn about those and modularizing your code more if you don't already. They're super useful and make for taking your code to the next level. So
Awesome. Eric, and thank you, Jim and Elsa. And I have one more slide that I think was at the end of mine that I'll just throw in there as like a
A note of caution. And so there's one more thing that I asked Chat, thought it was a simple question, like, is 47 a prime number? We all remember prime numbers, right? From like algebra, right? You can divide it by 1 on itself. So 47 is a prime number, right? No, 47 is not a prime number. A prime number is a positive integer greater than 1 that has no positive integer divisors other than 1 in itself. In the case of 47, it can be divided evenly by 1 and by 47, not divisible by any other positive integer. Therefore, 47 is a prime number. So just be careful, right? When you're taking a response from something like this and sticking it into your manuscript or your proposal, that you double check things, right? So, okay. Thanks again to Eric and Jim and Elsa. We've got a couple minutes left. Did anybody else want to share out like some of your ChatGPT wins or losses or things that you've learned or found useful in terms of using chat in your work? Jennifer, is that a hand raise or?
Yeah, kind of like, should I share this? Should I not share this? So by way of this, I will also say EASL just put out our new faculty hire advertisement. It's live, full consideration by November 11th. So please share the word. In the writing of that job application, I did use ChatGPT to help me identify areas within environmental data science that I asked it, I think, what areas are primed for data harmonization using advanced analytical approaches. And it was very interesting, the thematic things that came up, and it definitely helped me identify some gaps in our thinking, the committee's thinking, in terms of like what were some areas that we had missed in thinking about, you know, what thematically is a great topic area right now for data harmonization and AI techniques in the environmental sciences. So
Cool.
Yeah, it was a primer, but it was not like a definitive, like, this is the list that we should use. It was more like, okay, we missed something, let's add that in. So it is interesting to kind of use that technology to gap fill, I think is what we were using it for, or I was using it for.
Yep. Reese, you're gonna say something?
Yeah, one of my downfalls in writing papers is that I write the most boring titles for papers. And so recently we, working with this project with the Forest Service, we plugged our outline in and we said, let's make it funny. And so we got some great responses from ChatGPT.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah.
Writing the title for my paper, I love it.
Just going along with that one, I had it just, and I was kind of just like curious on what it would do, but I had it read a manuscript that I'm working on, and then I had it write a cover letter to the editor. And it did a pretty good job,
Very interesting.
at least as a start, you know, it's a 1-page, like 2-paragraph thing, pulling out the key points of the paper. You know, so it worked pretty well.
I love it. I have not thought of that.
I also had a really funny experience. We were reviewing papers for a conference. And a paper authored by me and my colleague showed up that we'd never written.
Okay.
I've seen that too, it makes up references.
Yeah.
I would not use it for searching for references.
Oh, no, yeah, no, I saw one of my slides. I said, is there any evidence in the literature of people doing this thing that you're
No.
asking us to do? I did go through and look and see, like, do these papers exist? They did exist. I think 2 of them I felt like were maybe good examples that we could add to the literature review, but the third one was like pretty like adjacent, Sibeli.
So yeah, I'm not using as much as I would like to, but my last use, so interesting thing, it was for the hackathon that we are preparing.
Yep.
So I would like to create a data cube that's community driven.
Mhm.
So I got the questionnaire that they applied for the participants, and just like filter like rank for me like the 3 most type of data that they use.
Yep.
So, and then I get a good profile of the participants, and then I guess it will help us. It's helping us to create a more community-driven data cube for the group.
Love it. So taking all of the ideas that they had about data that they'd like to play with and saying, what are the top 3 areas or whatever?
Another thing, for example, what type of programming language they are familiar with. So then we can design better the EDS training, for example.
Yeah.
So
Cool. Other examples, Jennifer, you got one more?
Or, which is, we used it for the summit.
Yes, we
This
did.
is, again, Ty has had like
Yeah.
a major influence on our community using this. But we did use it to take 600 ideas down to 60, I think it was. One thing I learned in that process is there's a lot of bias in the language that's used to describe ideas. And so like, you gotta watch that.
Yep.
And it's colonial language, it's like all kinds of stuff that can come up in that kind of distillation. The other thing that I felt like it did was it generalized, it made things very generic
yeah,
and kind of stripped out the ideas that were like a little bit more on the outskirts of normalcy, or not normalcy, but like the status quo, whatever that is in the language. So that's one thing that I would say, like, I'm not sure it's great at pushing novelty. I think what it's great at is finding generalizability.
yes.
So anyways, it's kind of an interesting process.
Yeah. Yeah, and I just noticed Lily in the chat mentioned that like that's one of her biggest cons for chat is that the data that it's trained on is gonna be biased. And so
Mhm.
you're gonna see instances of racism or colonialism a lot of times. And so
Yeah,
It's very subtle. That's the other thing. It's very, it can be very subtle. Like, you may not necessarily see it as like, oh, that's a racist comment. You're like, no, it's actually in the language that's used to describe something. And so that's the piece where I feel like we all need to be a little bit more aware of how that can play out. And I'm not sure if it's as relevant for the coding use cases as it is for thematic installation.
Yeah, what I feel, I try to create something and I see that the creation is not good. I like, as you said, it's biased, yeah, it's not good. I guess we need like we need us to check it definitely. What I'm trying to do is like to get something that's already done and then summarize patterns that we need within something that's already produced by someone. So a unit test, for example, you created a code and then you just check it. But not asking it to create something, because then you're going to find lots of weirdness.
Right.
Yeah, so.
Right,
So-
yes, exactly, weirdness, right, it's a good way to put it.
Yeah, I'll jump in. This is, I'm writing a memoir about mental illness, so this is like not related stuff, but I did ask ChatGPT to write a bunch of stories about people with various mental illnesses. And it was a little bit like Uncanny Valley. For one thing, they were all women named Emily. Well, I mean, all of them, like, but like overwhelmingly, I got this, like, I got like white sounding female names, overwhelmingly, and so there is like. Yeah, I mean, and I think that this book is actually very good at like explaining why this happens with these large language models, so I do recommend it, but it's looking for shortcuts, right? And it's a stereotype, it's nothing, it's not a shortcut.
Yeah, that's crazy. That's a crazy bit to reflect on. Thank you.
Yeah, another thing that I saw, like just to finish, I saw yesterday on Twitter that state flow over like that TIFF just dropped.
Yeah.
Potentially like in the last year,
Right.
and they are thinking that probably it's ChatGPT that's coming.
Yeah, I wonder if that's why there were no real responses to that post that I showed, because it was from 3 months ago. And like usually you would have a response to something like that.
Right.
It looked like we did have one person on the line that wanted to share, and I wondered if Sunyi.
I have to say that I did this back in February, so I don't know, ChatGPT advanced since then. It's been more than 6 months. So that's the time that I was conducting a loop analysis in R. And a loop analysis in ecological study is actually a systematic development by Rick Levins. He passed away a few years ago. And I use his qualitative modeling, which includes loop analysis and time averaging. Now many people are using it right now, and I just wanted to test it in ChatGPT. But it gave me, something that's really, really totally I couldn't use at all. So it gave me like a library dissolve that's for differential equation, and give me Quarderer equations, time series to solve it. So everything that's the basic Quarderer, what we learned in population or community ecology or theoretical ecology. And I just felt that's really funny. And that's the time that I felt ChatGPT wasn't reliable. When I asked for coding, and that's it. But I hope that as I tried it a few minutes ago, it still gave me something very wrong. This time it didn't give me Quarderer or differential equations, give me something else. So that's it. I can stop sharing.
Wow, yeah, great example. Great example. All right, anybody else in the room or online want to share? All right, let's give it up for our speakers. Thanks again, everybody, for coming today. Hope that was informative. Let us know if you have any questions about anything. Thanks again.